Next up, we've got to talk about the moon soil plants. So let's break it down a little bit and talk about some of the specifics. I'm going to go into the article that was released on May 12th from NASA, and then I'm going to touch on a few things and give my outlook of why I think this, like, what is it about this test of growing plants in lunar soil? How is this going to change the future? So, NASA-funded study breaks new ground in plant research. In the early days of the space age, the Apollo astronauts took part in a visionary plan: bring samples of the lunar surface material, known as regolith, back to Earth where they could be studied with state-of-the-art equipment and saved for future research not yet imagined. Bring us to today, 50 years later, at the dawn of the Artemis era, and the next astronaut returned to the moon, first woman and person of color. The 3 of those samples have been used to successfully grow plants. So for the first time ever, researchers have grown the hardy and well-studied Arabidopsis thaliana. I'm actually surprised at how well I said that. In the nutrient-poor lunar regolith. Now, I did look up Arabidopsis thaliana. It's essentially a weed, which is interesting too, because if you know how pervasive weeds can be on Earth, you would expect that something like a weed would be one of the things to survive, like a cockroach, right, on the moon. So I think it's a very interesting thing. It also has a lot of features of plants that we want to grow so that you can have a baseline, plant one in regular Earth soil and then plant one in lunar soil and see how those different things grow and how long they last. They said here, this research is critical to NASA's long-term human exploration goals, as we'll need to use resources found on the moon and Mars to develop food sources for future astronauts living and operating in deep space. That was from NASA Administrator Bill Nelson. This fundamental plant growth research is also a key example of how NASA is working to unlock agricultural innovations that could help us understand how plants might overcome stressful conditions in food-scarce areas here on Earth. A very good, this is why Bill Nelson is the NASA administrator. He knows how to sell. He knows how to sell space. He gives the Earth example. I love that. But it's a really interesting idea, right? So I think originally, before this happened, I think even myself, I held this opinion, that we all saw The Martian. We all saw Mark Watney grow plants on Mars. And it was like, oh, it's because he's a botanist that the plants grew in the first place. But it seems that you could probably grow plants in a lot of different soil. The question is, how long will they survive? And if they do survive, how much nutrients are you actually getting from that thing? And how much has it changed having to adapt to the soil that it's not used to growing in? I think that is a huge change. Now this shows the populace that growing plants on the moon is possible. Granted, we need to develop some techniques. We need to figure out how to make this work, but it's a really big first step. I don't think it blows, and an article we'll have here as well from ARS Technica by John Timmer. Basically, they're saying there that this is not groundbreaking by any means, but it at least sets up the groundwork for future research, for more development and money to get it actually done. So it says here in this article, to grow the Arabidopsis, there we go. The team used samples collected on the Apollo 11, 12, and 17 missions, with only a gram of regolith allotted for each plant. The team added water and then seeds to the samples. Then they put the trays into terrarium boxes in a clean room. A nutrient solution was added daily. After 2 days, they started to sprout, said Annalisa Paul, who is also a professor of horticultural sciences at the University of Florida, who is the first author on the paper. Everything sprouted. I can't tell you how astonished we were. See? It was even surprising to them. Every plant, whether in lunar sample or in a control, looked the same up until about day 6. At day 6, however, it was clear that the plants were not as robust as the control group of plants growing in volcanic ash, and the plants were growing differently depending on which type of sample they were in. The plants grew more slowly and had stunted roots. Additionally, Some had stunted leaves and sported reddish pigmentation. After 20 days, just before the plants started to flower, the team harvested the plants, ground them up, and studied the RNA. In a biological system, genes are decoded in multiple steps. First, the genes, or DNA, are transcribed into RNA. Then, the RNA is translated into a protein sequence. These proteins are responsible for carrying out many of the biological processes in a living organism. Sequencing the RNA revealed that the patterns of genes that were expressed, which showed that the plants were indeed under stress and had reacted the way researchers have seen Arabidopsis respond to growth in other harsh environments, such as when soil has too much salt or heavy metals. So it's kind of a, for me, it's a message that stress is not good, whether you're a plant or a human being or whatever you are. So, and it's an interesting metaphorical example too, where it's like even your environment can be stressful. And I know that seems obvious, but it's a good lesson. It's less about whether something is possible and more about, are you able to have a good mindset about it? Are you able to go about it a good way? How much that has a big effect on how you are as a person. But as far as plants go, because that's exactly what we're talking about here, it's a major breakthrough because it shows us that growing plants on other planets and other soil around the galaxy seems to be something that we may be, not only are we able to plant things, but now the game is on to figure out how do you make these extremely stressful environments less stressful, promote growth in the areas that we want to, right? You'd want to make sure, we have specifics now, right? The plants grew more slowly, so you probably want to try and increase how much they grew. The stunted roots, that's not great. That means they're less sturdy and they're not able to get as much nutrients, as far as I understand. And stunted leaves and the reddish pigmentation is an interesting thing. Is the reddish pigmentation a sign of stress? Is it a sign of something else? Does that mean that we may have lunar plants that are mostly red? Like, that would be really interesting, right? If different plants grow in different places, you may be able to increase the nutrients, but the color and the look, something about that may change. What we'll find out over time as this gets worked on, but it's some interesting things to think about of now that we have some details, how do you think about this differently? I love this kind of science where we've got this held idea that we've all thought you can't grow plants somewhere else, and then we're able to do it, and then we go, whoa, interesting. Like, let me learn more about this. So I thought it was an amazing story. This is John Timmer's. I'll talk about just this first thing that he talks about, and I'll leave the rest for you to go and read, because it is a really good article. It says, this is the final section, what this tells us. There are a couple of ways to look at these results. The first is that the study represented a serious stress test. While the samples were watered using a nutrient solution, they were dumped into lunar regolith as is, no mixing with organic material, and no microbial growth that could sequester some of the metallic toxins before the plants encountered them. So the experimental setup made things harder than they needed to be. So, to his point, there's so many things that we didn't do that we could try. Maybe there's a combination of Earth soil and lunar soil that, if we're going to go grow stuff on the moon, we figure out how much we need, and then we get like a blend of this. And as he said, which is such an interesting point, like maybe there is some microbes, getting a microbiome to go along with these plants like we have here on Earth. We take it for granted, but we have it here on Earth, that do so many little things to make the environment less stressful, and take care of some of the things like metallic toxins that are going to be most likely involved in most soil that we're going to be experiencing out in space, and probably in amounts that we've never seen before. So really, really interesting result that was shared on May 12th